Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They came with rules, fines, and fake smiles, armed with clipboards and suburban dreams. But when a Texas rancher's land became the target of a power-hungry HOA, they didn't just start a dispute, they sparked a war. And Cal Robertson, he's not the kind of man who backs down. They say a man's land is his castle. If that's true, mine's a damn fortress, and I've spent my life making sure of it. 220 acres of dry Texas stubbornness, patched with oat fields, cattle pasture, and blood memories that go back 3 generations. My grandfather bought this land after World War II, built the house I live in with his own hands, and signed the deed himself in black ink that's still visible on the original parchment. 70 acres of it are officially designated for agricultural use, with formal exemptions from every city code, zoning board, and nosy-ass homeowners association from here to Amarillo. And that is exactly the way I like it. The day the letter came, it was a Thursday. I remember because I'd just finished welding a new hinge on the west pasture gate, and the heat was kicking up off the dirt like an oven door had swung open. The envelope was glossy, heavy, with a gold-embossed seal that read Crescent Trails Estates HOA. I nearly laughed right there. I thought maybe it was a mix-up. One of those bullshit circulars they send around trying to sell you lawn service you never asked for. But the heading wasn't a sales pitch. It was an accusation. Notice of violation, breach of sanitary and acoustic standards in community buffer zone. What followed was a bureaucratic fever dream. According to these self-appointed gods of suburbia, I was guilty of, and I quote, conducting unsanctioned agricultural activity within visual perimeter, air quality degradation via livestock, and prohibited mechanical noise pollution on weekend. Hours. Then came the hammer. A fine of $4,200, and an order to cease plowing activity during Crescent Trail's rest periods. Whatever the hell that meant. Now, I'm not a man known for keeping my temper under wraps, but I'll admit I stared at that letter for a solid minute in silence. Then I folded it, set it on the dash of my truck, and drove straight to their little HOA office off Horseshoe Loop. I didn't call first. I didn't knock when I walked in either. The office looked like something out of a real estate showroom. Glass surfaces, fake smiles, and not a single square inch of dust. A little blonde woman in a beige pantsuit stood behind the reception desk, talking into a headset. I asked for Karen Hayworth, president of the Crescent Trails Estates HOA. She looked up and smiled like a snake about to eat. "You must be Mr. Robertson. We were hoping you'd come by." I handed her the violation notice, then pulled a folder out of my satchel and dropped it on the counter. "This here's my deed. 70 acres exempt from HOA jurisdiction, registered in the Williamson County Clerk's office, tax exempt under agricultural provisions, and outside of your planned development district by about a goddamn mile. Your rules don't apply to me." She didn't even look at the paperwork, just crossed her arms like she was on a goddamn episode of one of those HOA horror shows. "Mr. Robertson, I understand your attachment to tradition, but things are changing. Crescent Trails is redefining the entire area's visual and environmental identity. Your property borders our conservation corridor and thus falls under our expanded aesthetic oversight." I nearly laughed in her face. "Ma'am, you can redefine all the pastel stucco boxes you want, but your imaginary lines don't redraw my deed. Your conservation corridor ends at my fence line, the one with the sign that says private ranch, no trespassing." She smiled in that smug HOA makes the rules way and said, "This community is evolving, Mr. Robertson. You can either be part of the vision or remain an obstacle." I leaned in just enough for her to get the full weight of my voice. "You send one more letter to my ranch, one more fine, one more so-called warning. I'll send my attorney with a lawsuit for harassment so thick your grandkids will feel it." And with that, I walked out. But not before taking a slow look at the HOA's framed community master plan map on the wall. It showed their neighborhood, about 140 near-identical ranch-style luxury homes crammed onto 1-acre plots, boxed in on all sides, except mine. My land stood out like a bloodstain on an otherwise sterile napkin, and I knew then. They hated that. They hated the mud, the cows, the tractors, the windmill, the hay bales, the actual scent of earth. They didn't want Texas, they wanted Pinterest. I climbed into my truck, tore the violation notice clean down the middle, and tossed it on the passenger seat. They wanted a war. They'd picked the wrong rancher. It was just under a week later when I noticed the first one. I was hauling bales out to the west feedlot, sun still low, air thick with the smell of damp alfalfa and diesel, when something caught my eye near the tree line. At first, I thought it was a trail marker or maybe some county utility post, but it wasn't. It was a wooden stake, new, freshly driven, topped with a polished plaque that read in crisp serif letters, Community Conservation Zone, HOA Protected Area. Do not disturb. I climbed off the tractor, walked over, and felt the heat in my chest rise with every step. That stake wasn't on the HOA's side of the fence. It was inside my damn property line. 15 meters, easy, right in front of my equipment hangar. I tore it out of the ground, threw it into the flatbed, and drove straight back up to the house to check my cameras. Sure enough, time-stamped footage from 3 nights prior showed a group of 3 men, all wearing high-vis vests marked with the Crescent Trails logo, sneaking past the north fence just before midnight, hammering in 4 of those stakes along a curved line. Like they were marking new territory. They weren't just pissing on my fence anymore. They were claiming land. I didn't even bother calling HOA. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Harlan showed up just before noon. Same guy who once helped me scare off a drunk bow hunter who thought my pasture was a public game reserve. He took one look at the stake and shook his head. "That's a problem," he muttered. I handed him the footage. He watched silently, eyes narrowing. "Looks like trespass and unauthorized signage." "That's enough for a report." He wrote it up on the hood of his cruiser, handed me the case number, and told me to keep everything documented, which I was already doing. Hell, I had a whole USB stick full of surveillance videos, drone footage, even time-lapse of my cows being startled by one of HOA's sprinklers when they snuck over the line last month. That evening, just as I was pouring a bourbon and preparing to forget the day, I found another letter waiting in my mailbox. HOA stationary again, but this time it was marked Official Memorandum and stamped with that same stupid golden tree logo. It read, "Dear Mr. Robertson, per our community meeting on the 4th of this month, and under Amendment 14 of the Crescent Trails Visual and Environmental Code, your property now falls within the extended visual influence perimeter. This designation requires compliance with all guidelines pertaining to smell mitigation, auditory neutrality, and aesthetic buffering. Your continued operation of large machinery on weekends and the presence of agricultural odors are now considered community violations. We urge you to review the attached documentation and adjust operations accordingly to avoid further penalties. Sincerely, Karen Hayworth, President, Crescent Trails Estates HOA." They'd invented a perimeter, a fake perimeter, not even city-sanctioned, not even legally filed. Just something they decided during their little wine and cracker meeting, and now expected me to follow. I didn't even finish reading the packet. I grabbed one of the signs from the stake pile in the flatbed, carried it out back, lit it up with a can of diesel and a box of kitchen matches, and filmed the whole damn thing. Then I made my own sign, 10 feet wide. Metal sheet bolted to cedar posts, spray painted in red across the face. Private ranch, not HOA. Keep out. Trespassers will be filmed and shamed. I posted that thing right next to the gravel road that separated my fence line from their plastic palaces. I wanted them to see it every time they drove their golf carts to nowhere. Next morning, someone from the HOA Facebook group screenshotted it and posted, "Extremist farmer threatens neighborhood." One comment said I was a threat to the community's visual integrity. Another said I had anger issues and probably illegal. Livestock. I didn't know you could have illegal cows, but hell, maybe next week they'd invent a cow perimeter zone too. By lunchtime, I had a drone buzzing my field. Not mine. I shot it down with birdshot and left the pieces on my gatepost like a warning. They weren't just trying to find me anymore. They were trying to erase me. My farm didn't fit their brochure. My cows didn't moo in cursive. My world didn't match their fantasy. But I had something they didn't, the law and the land, and I wasn't going anywhere. A few days after the whole sign-burning incident, I was elbow-deep in tractor grease when I heard the rumble of tires on gravel. Not the UPS guy, not a neighbor. It was an unmarked county sedan, gray, bureaucratic, and radiating paperwork. A man in a button-down shirt stepped out holding a clipboard like it was a damn weapon. "Mr. Cal Robertson," he asked, voice all tight and official. "Unless you're here to help replace a fuel filter, what do you want?" He didn't even smile. I'm with the Williamson County Land Services. We received a request for a boundary reassessment of parcel A912 froze. That's my land, I said, standing up straight, hands still covered in oil. Who the hell submitted that request? He cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Per policy, we can't disclose complainant names without a public records request. However, the filing party listed themselves as representing the Crescent Trails Homeowners Association. Of course they did. I didn't say anything, just wiped my hands off, turned around, and walked to my office. 5 minutes later, I dropped a bound file on the desk in front of the inspector, deed history, zoning certificates, agricultural exemption paperwork with the state seal, water rights documentation, tax records going back to the goddamn Reagan administration. Every square foot of my land has been in my family since 1952. 70 acres are exempt under Section 6.14 of the Agricultural Land Use Act. And this, I pointed to a laminated topographical map with my grandfather's handwritten notes. This is the original border filed with the state. That line hasn't moved in 70 years. He flipped through the papers, slower now, more cautious. The complaint claimed 15 acres of this land were formerly under a public trust that was dissolved in 1978. That the land was never properly transferred. My jaw clenched. Bullshit. That trust was my grandfather's cattle cooperative, shut down after he bought out the other two ranchers. We had the court order and notarized sale. But apparently HOA had dug through old records and found just enough ambiguity to create a narrative. And that's when it clicked. They weren't just being petty anymore. They were orchestrating a paper war, a full-scale red tape invasion. And I'd been so focused on fences and signs that I didn't see the bullets coming from printers and planning boards. That afternoon, I drove to the Williamson County Records Archive, a half-hour away. It's a fluorescent-lit cave full of old clerks and dustier maps. Took me 3 hours and 3 favors, but I found the original court file, docket number, final dissolution of the Hillwater Ranch Cooperative, full transfer of rights to Calvin J. Robertson, my grandfather, stamped, sealed, archived. Then I drove to the Department of Agriculture Regional Office and got the original AG exemption certificate. Then to the tax assessor's vault to retrieve a microfiche copy of the 1979 land survey with official county borders. Took the clerk 15 minutes just to crank the damn thing into focus. I left with a stack of documents nearly 2 inches thick. That night, I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense property rights specialist named John Delgado, who used to work for the state attorney general. I hadn't needed her in years, but this was war. When I explained what was happening, she was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Cal, this isn't just harassment anymore. This is coordinated fraud. If they filed that reassessment with false documentation, that's actionable." She filed an emergency injunction request the next morning, and we mailed a formal cease and desist to the Crescent Trails HOA. I had a copy hand-delivered to their little clubhouse by a retired Marine from my VFW post, just for effect. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. They'd crossed the fence line. Now they were trying to erase it altogether. This wasn't about fines or noise or goddamn smells anymore. This was about land, ownership, control. They were trying to take what was mine, piece by piece, signature by signature. Well, they'd just declared war with the wrong rancher. There's something about dragging a corrupt HOA into court that feels like branding cattle in the old days. Messy, hot, and full of screaming. I was done playing defense. After the bogus boundary reassessment and the attempted land grab, I gave Jean the green light to move forward with a civil lawsuit. She filed it under Robertson versus Crescent Trails Estates Homeowners Association, citing attempted fraudulent annexation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That last one was mostly for flair, but hell, it wasn't wrong. The morning after the paperwork was filed, I woke up to something new stuck in my fence, a neatly laminated copy of an open letter from the HOA, signed by Karen Hayworth herself. It had been circulated to the Crescent Trails Community Watch, and, judging by the Facebook chatter, was making its way around local inboxes like wildfire. In it, Karen painted me as a dangerous and volatile individual, accused me of intimidating behavior, and claimed that my property posed a consistent threat to community harmony. She even included a photo of the sign I'd posted after the stake burning, cropped, of course, to exclude the part where it clearly said private ranch and not death camp. The whole letter reeked of fake compassion, like a crocodile crying over the deer it just ate. But it worked. That week, I noticed the side eyes when I went into town. A lady at the feed store refused to make eye contact. A guy I'd shared beers with at the rodeo last year didn't even nod hello. Then came the HOAs, Family Aesthetic Safety Initiative, a bullshit campaign dressed up as a neighborhood beautification project. Karen had signs posted around the edges of Crescent trails that read, "Preserve our views, maintain our values, reject agricultural pollution." They positioned their houses like little islands of modern virtue, and mine. The evil medieval fortress at the edge of suburbia. So I fought back the way I knew how, with cows, kids, and a big-ass spotlight. First, I called up a few local teachers I knew from the Veterans Ag Education Program and offered to host a field trip. 2 weeks later, a yellow school bus rumbled up my dirt road and unloaded 35 wide-eyed fifth graders. I gave them the grand tour, how a water tower works, how solar panels power an off-grid barn, how oats grow, how cows are rotated through pastures to avoid soil depletion. They took turns feeding calves and measuring windmill output with handheld meters. That same afternoon, I had my nephew edit together a quick highlight reel and posted it online with the caption, "Texas Agriculture, Real Education, Not HOA Indoctrination." Didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. 200,000 views in 3 days, comments pouring in. Farmers from Iowa, ranchers from Montana, city kids saying they wished they'd learned this stuff in school. By the end of the week, a local news station reached out, then a regional one. Then some damn influencer reposted it with a bunch of hashtags like Farm Freedom and HOA Overreach. The video made it impossible for HOA to play the evil farmer card anymore. Karen tried anyway, posted a passive-aggressive message on Facebook about manipulating youth with outdated agricultural propaganda. It didn't go over well. One of the parents from the school trip replied with a photo of her kid holding a lamb on my ranch with the caption, "Propaganda. He learned more about food here than he ever did in class. Maybe Crescent Trails should visit sometime. Just don't wear white shoes." That reply got more likes than the HOA's original post. That's when I knew I'd hit something deeper than landlines or zoning maps. I was becoming a symbol, and not just to angry ranchers like me. Still, not everyone was thrilled. I came home one night to find a bullet hole in the corner of my metal sign, the one I painted after burning their steak. Just one shot. Probably a warning. No note, no shell casing. Just a hole. I added 2 more cameras, then came the press. A regional journalist from the Austin Post by the name of Drew Mendoza showed up unannounced one morning, said he'd been following the social media buzz and thought there might be a deeper story. I gave him an hour. He ended up staying 5. Turned out Drew had grown up on a cattle ranch outside El Paso before going into journalism. He understood the land. More importantly, he understood the language of war disguised as legality. He dug into HOA meeting minutes, campaign contributions, and internal planning documents. 1 week later, he published an article titled, "A Rancher, a HOA, and the Quiet War for Texas Land." The piece was long, investigative, detailed. He interviewed me, some Crescent Trails residents, a land use lawyer, even a retired county planner who flat out said, "These HOAs are starting to behave like governments, but without the accountability." That line stuck. It got quoted on talk radio, picked up by a podcast, even cited in a college paper someone emailed me. And just like that, the ground shifted. Crescent Trails wasn't just a petty HOA anymore. It was becoming a symbol of something darker. A blueprint for control. They had underestimated me, but now the whole damn state was watching. I was loading sacks of seed grain onto the flatbed, oats for the north field, when I saw her, Karen Hayworth, standing on the edge of my property like a crow on a fence post, arms folded, sunglasses reflecting the sun like a damn cyborg. She was well past the no trespassing signs, no clipboard, no HOA goons with her, just standing there, watching. Now I didn't say a word. Didn't even wave. I just kept doing what I was doing. I'd seen deer with more nerve. I hitched the trailer, climbed into the tractor, and started driving it toward the silo to unload the seed into the gravity wagon. It was a slow, wide path, maybe 5 miles an hour tops. Tractor roaring, dust kicking up, sun burning through my hat. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her pull out a phone. She held it high, arms stiff like she was saluting the dumbest flag in Texas. Filming. I thought nothing of it. Honestly, I figured it was more Facebook garbage. Farmer threatens the HOA with wheat, or whatever. I was wrong. 3 hours later, while I was out back welding the hay lift, 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up. Lights off, but 2 deputies stepped out, hands on their belts. One of them I didn't recognize. The other was Deputy Harlan again, and the look on his face was somewhere between irritated and embarrassed. "Mr. Robertson," he said, "we got a report of an attempted assault with a vehicle. Specifically, agricultural equipment." I blinked. "You're telling me someone called the cops and said I tried to run them over with a tractor?" The younger deputy cleared his throat. "We received a video recording. A woman identified as Karen Hayworth claims you drove a tractor at her in an aggressive manner and that she feared for her life." I nearly burst out laughing. Fear for her life. She was standing on my damn property past the posted line, filming me while I was hauling grain. 5 miles an hour, boys. My cows run faster than that. I invited them inside and pulled the security footage. Every inch of my property's covered with motion-triggered cameras. We watched the whole scene from 2 angles. Karen walking onto my land, Karen standing, Karen filming, me driving the tractor at a snail's pace, Karen walking away. Not once did I veer toward her. Not once did she move like she felt threatened. Harlan exhaled sharply and nodded. "Yeah, this isn't going anywhere. I'll file it as a false report and trespass complaint." "Good," I said, "because now I've got paperwork for her too." Jean filed the countersuit that same day. Criminal trespass, false police report, and defamation. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a shot across the bow. Karen wanted to escalate this into legal drama. Fine, let's do theater. A few days later, a local blog ran the body cam footage from one of the deputies, clearly showing the screen on Karen's phone playing the cropped video she submitted. Everyone could see how edited it was. Everyone could see she was standing on posted private property. The comment section lit up. My favorite one read, "That tractor was moving slower than my grandma in a bathrobe." Karen needs to calm her suburb down, but Karen didn't calm anything. She doubled down. HOA released an official statement about the emotional trauma endured by our leadership team. They said my actions created a hostile and unsafe perimeter for community members. Then came the kicker. They accused me of operating dangerous industrial equipment in proximity to residential visual zones. That's right. Apparently, if a Crescent Trails resident can see a tractor, it's now a safety risk. I responded the way any rational man would. I ordered a 20-foot American flag, installed a new pole next to my barn, and beneath it hung a steel sign that read, "Property rights are civil rights. Trespassers will be documented and memed." That one got on the news again. My following doubled overnight. By now, I had cattle ranchers, ex-Marines, libertarian bloggers, a few lawyers, and even a retired judge in my inbox cheering me on. But not everyone was so supportive. I got a package on my porch one night. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words typed in bold, "You can't win this." No signature, just that. I sat on the porch for a long time that night, dogs at my feet, shotgun leaned against the wall, and the Texas wind pushing against the oak trees like they were trying to whisper something old and angry. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were trying to break me, but they didn't realize yet. My kind doesn't break easy. It started with a knock on the door and a manila envelope. Drew Mendoza again, the journalist from the Austin Post. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept, but there was fire in his eyes. "Cal," he said, "you're not going to believe what I just found." I let him in, poured him coffee, and watched as he pulled out a stack of printed emails. "You remember Green Star Developments?" he asked. The name rang a bell. They built Crescent Trails. But here's the thing. They haven't stopped building. And they haven't stopped pushing. He laid out the papers like playing cards. Internal HOA meeting minutes, Green Star development proposals, email chains, donation records. One message was from Karen Hayworth herself, dated just 3 months before the HOA sent me their first violation letter. In it, she wrote to a Green Star project manager, "If we can redefine the edge of the Crescent Zone to include the open land to the west, it becomes viable for future residential expansion. Robertson's property is the only real obstacle. He's isolated and old school. Push hard enough and he'll sell or slip." I read that line twice. They never wanted peace. They never wanted visual harmony or community standards. They wanted my land. They wanted it paved over, manicured, turned into model homes and fake lakes and mailboxes that all match. Drew had more. He uncovered that HOA funds, monthly dues from residents, were used to hire a private cartographer who redrew the local GIS map to suggest that part of my property fell into an undefined trust zone. That was the same lie Karen used to trigger the county reassessment. It was deliberate, calculated, fraud. Even worse, Drew found that 2 of the county zoning inspectors had received consulting fees from Green Star, same ones who tried to stall my legal filings last month. Same ones who lost my exemption paperwork for a full week until John raised hell. It wasn't just a HOA war anymore. It was a corporate land grab, dressed up in HOA language and legalese. John was furious. They're orchestrating a conspiracy to defraud a landowner and convert private property without consent, she said. This isn't civil litigation anymore. This is criminal. We filed a formal complaint with the Texas Attorney General's office that afternoon. Drew sent his findings to a federal land rights watchdog group, and within 48 hours, a Department of Agriculture field investigator called me personally to ask for permission to walk the boundaries of my ranch. That night, I sat down at the kitchen table with all the documents spread out like a war map. I was connecting the dots when something else hit me like a kick to the ribs. The internal email from Karen, the one about pushing me out, it referenced a meeting, a private strategy session held at a residence house 2 months prior. The name listed, Tom Gibb. That one stung. Tom had been one of the few neighbors who shook my hand at the feed store, who brought over venison jerky after a cold snap last winter, the kind of guy who talked about freedom and land staying in the hands of the people. And he was in on it. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know. I called him up, invited him over for a drink. He came wearing that same damn work vest and big Texas smile. We sat on the porch, dogs between us, bourbon in hand. So tell me, Tom, I said slowly, you remember that day I showed you my deed packet? All the old maps, the copies of the 1979 survey. Sure, he said, sipping. Hell of a binder, real thorough, I nodded. Funny thing is, that exact survey, right down to my red markings and notes, ended up in the hands of Karen's lawyer, copied, scanned, reframed to say the trust was never properly dissolved. Someone gave it to them. His smile faded. I saw the guilt in his eyes before he opened his mouth. Look, Cal, I didn't mean for it to go that far. Karen said it was just for reference. Said the HOA just wanted to clarify the line for landscaping reasons. Landscaping? I spat. Tom, they're trying to steal my damn ranch. He looked away. They told me you were planning to subdivide, sell to a private airstrip developer. Said it would tank all our home values. My fists clenched so tight I thought the glass would crack in my hand. You really believe that? I didn't know what to believe, he muttered. They made it sound like you were going to screw the whole community. That was it. I stood up, poured his drink into the grass, and pointed to the road. Get off my land, Tom. And if you ever come back without a damn apology and a notarized affidavit, you better bring a lawyer. He didn't argue. As he drove away, I felt it. Not just betrayal, but something deeper. A sickness. These people didn't just want my land. They were spreading a rot through the entire system. Neighbors turning on neighbors. Truth twisted. Bureaucracy weaponized. But I still had my land. And I still had the fight in me. Courtrooms smell like sweat and toner. The kind of place where justice is supposed to live, but more often just rents a room. Still, I showed up in clean boots and my best pearl snap shirt. Jane wore her usual black suit, armed with binders and a tone that could turn a judge into stone. This wasn't just a civil hearing anymore. This was the first day of a criminal hearing against the Crescent Trails HOA, and more specifically, its president, Karen Hayworth. It was standing room only. Reporters from Austin, Dallas, even Houston showed up. A few residents from Crescent Trails were there too. Some in support of Karen, some looking like they just realized they'd backed the wrong horse. And me? I sat in the front row, stone-faced, watching Karen pace behind her attorney like a rabid show dog on a short leash. The prosecution went first. They opened with the GIS fraud. Exhibits A through D, copies of the doctored maps submitted by HOA to the county zoning board, clearly altered to show a green corridor overlay that didn't exist. Then came the records from Green Star Developments, payment logs, emails, and minutes from the HOA meetings that showed Karen had coordinated the false expansion of their visual zone to make the property development eligible. Then they dropped the bomb. A subpoenaed email from Karen to one of the Green Star execs, sent from her personal Gmail account, Once Robertson's perimeter is reclassified, Green Star can begin soil testing. I'll get the inspectors handled. HOA will vote to accept the transfer after we bury the trust issue under zoning revision. That last sentence might as well have been a confession. Jean was like a damn surgeon during cross-examination, calm, precise, and lethal. She walked the court through every document, every interaction, every fabricated ordinance. She even called Deputy Harlan to the stand to testify about the fake assault accusation, showing how Karen had submitted a chopped-up video to the sheriff's office, knowingly omitting the full footage. Then came the witnesses. First up, the private cartographer Karen hired, who folded like a lawn chair, admitted under oath that he was paid well above market rate and given specific aesthetic targets to integrate into the HOA boundary renderings. Then, a whistleblower from the Crescent Trails Board, a woman named Melanie. I barely remembered her from the early HOA meetings Drew had dug up. She testified that Karen often bypassed official votes, making executive decisions for the greater good. Melanie had pushed back once. Karen threatened to have her dues tripled through a backdated fine system. She quit the board a month later. But the kicker, the moment everything turned, was when one of the county inspectors Karen paid under the table took the stand. He'd struck a deal with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges. He admitted not only to stalling my exemption paperwork, but to intentionally misplacing documents from the agricultural office to delay my legal defense. When Jean asked him if he knew the land was legally exempt from HOA oversight, he said, "Yes, ma'am. It was clear from the start. That's why Karen told us to bury it." She said, and I quote, "This rancher won't roll over unless we strangle him with procedure." The courtroom went dead silent. Karen's attorney tried to argue the HOA was just trying to protect community values, but even the judge looked like he'd swallowed battery acid. By the end of the third day, the court issued a blistering preliminary ruling. All Crescent Trails HOA claims against my property were declared invalid and unenforceable. Karen Hayworth was found guilty of document falsification, fraud, conspiracy to commit unlawful land annexation, and obstruction of public administration. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with the possibility of federal charges pending. The HOA was ordered to pay me $610,000 in damages for legal costs, loss of income, emotional distress, and punitive damages. An emergency order was issued to freeze all HOA operations pending an independent audit. The judge explicitly stated, "This court recognizes a deliberate attempt by a homeowners association to extend unlawful control over private land. Through deception, coercion, and abuse of civic mechanisms, Karen didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared at me from across the courtroom like she still couldn't understand how a backwater rancher had beaten her. I stood when it was over, walked past her on my way out, didn't say a word, just looked her in the eye and tipped my hat." The following week, my inbox filled up with messages from Crescent Trails residents, most of them apologizing, some furious they'd been lied to, a few asking how to leave the HOA entirely. By the end of the month, over 30 families filed formal withdrawal notices with the county, citing loss of trust, financial mismanagement, and fear of legal liability. HOA lawyers tried to stop them, but with the leadership in shambles and the court decision hanging over their heads like a buzzard, the exodus couldn't be stopped. And just like that, the mighty Crescent Trails estates began to unravel, one angry homeowner at a time. The first thing I did after the ruling came down was replace my rusted front gate. Not because I needed a fresh look, but because I wanted it reinforced with steel tall enough to make a statement. Welded across the top in bold black letters, "Private Ranch. No HOA access, by court order," and just beneath it, a second sign, simple white metal, red font. "Trespassers will be documented and politely escorted out. Repeat offenders will meet the bulls." It wasn't about spite, it was about peace. Real peace, not the artificial, chemically fertilized version the HOA kept trying to sell. I hadn't seen a Crescent Trails vehicle use the old back road in weeks. Probably because I'd had the county permanently delisted from community use. That shortcut to the lake they used to rely on, now blocked by a 20-foot gate, monitored by solar-powered cameras, and marked on GPS as private no access. A few of them tried to argue it with the county, claimed it was public easement, But the court order spoke louder. No HOA jurisdiction, no buffer zone, and no more pretending their paper empire reached past my fence line. I didn't gloat, not publicly. But every time I saw that gate close behind me, I felt something shift inside my chest. Like something heavy I'd carried for months had finally fallen off. Then the letter came, from the Texas Department of Agriculture. Official state seal, certified delivery. They thanked me for exposing coordinated zoning manipulation and fraudulent land acquisition attempts and said my case had become part of a legislative committee's hearing on rural property rights. And, as recognition for the stress and visibility I'd brought to the issue, they were awarding me a grant of $180,000 to expand sustainable farming practices on heritage land. I used the funds wisely, upgraded my solar array, reinforced the water tower, built a greenhouse that could grow year-round, installed new irrigation so the oats wouldn't dry out during drought season. But I didn't stop there. That spring, I opened the gates, not to the HOA, but to the people who never had a voice in places like Crescent Trails. I invited local ranchers, homeschool groups, ag students, and curious city folks out for what I called the Liberty Field Market. No admission fee, no sponsor banners, just fresh produce, honest food, handmade tools, cattle displays, and a few musicians playing real songs about real things. One rule on the flyers: no HOA members admitted without written apology and a copy of their exit notice. Some thought I was joking. I wasn't. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about drawing a line, about reminding people that land matters, that truth matters, that no board meeting, no spreadsheet, and no petty tyrant with a clipboard should be able to erase a family's legacy. One woman from Crescent Trails showed up with her kids. She handed me an envelope. Inside was her resignation from the HOA, notarized and signed. Said she was sick of living in fear of her own mailbox. I shook her hand and told her she was welcome anytime. Funny thing is, the people who came weren't just country folks. There were teachers, engineers, young couples who wanted chickens instead of cul-de-sacs. Turns out, a lot of people are tired of being managed. Turns out, freedom still has a market. Karen's gone now, serving her sentence in a state facility last I heard. Crescent Trails still exists, technically, but they haven't elected a new president. They can't find anyone who wants the job. Half the board resigned. The remaining members meet once a month to talk about lawn height and whether they should allow mailboxes with curves. Meanwhile, my cows still moo, my tractors still rumble, and my land still breathes. And every time I look out across the field at sunset, I think they tried to build a prison on my pasture, but all they did was remind me what freedom sounds like.